Hello, everyone, and welcome to today's Sutta class. We will start with the Namo Tassa as usual. Feel free to join. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Buddhang Dhammang Sanghang Namasami. So, welcome to our last session of our series about the 7 friends from Kassapa Buddha's time. So, as you know, we have a mini-series about 7 monks who were very strong practitioners in Kassapa Buddha's time. One of them became an arahant, one of them became an anagami, and 5 of them passed away without any attainments. But because of the very strong seeds that they had planted and the strong commitment they had made to the Dhamma, all 5 of them were reborn again during Gautama Buddha's time in India as human beings, and all of them again came in contact with the Dhamma, and all 5 of them have very, very interesting life stories and very interesting suttas that the Buddha gave them, and all 5 of them were able to make progress in the Dhamma. 4 of them became arahants, 1 of them became an anagami. And so the life stories of these people and the suttas that the Buddha gave them is what we studied in the last few sessions. So, and today we are reading the last one, the one about Bahya Daruchirya, or Bahya of the bark cloth. And the other 4 friends that we have already studied were Sabya first, then Pukusati, then Dabamalaputa, and then Kumara Kassapa, or Kassapa the prince, which who we did last time. And today Bahya Daruchirya also has a very life story, and according to the commentaries, he was born into a fairly wealthy family. He became a merchant, and he did trade overseas, so he often had to go on sea voyages, and that was obviously very dangerous back in the day, but he went on those travels, on trips on ships, 7 times, and he returned always safe and sound. Nothing happened. But on the 8th trip, he actually was shipwrecked, and his ship sank, and he was washed overboard, and he was floating in the ocean, just clinging onto a plank. And finally, he was washed ashore in a place close to the river Ganges. So where the river Ganges meets the ocean, close to that place, he was washed ashore. But because he was the only survivor and he had lost all his clothes while he was in the ocean, so he was naked when he was washed ashore, he made himself a body covering of tree bark, and that's how he became known as Bahya Daruchirya, or Bahya with the bark cloth, because he had lost all his clothes. And then when he went to the next village trying to ask for help, all the villagers thought that he was actually a renunciant, that he was a wandering ascetic, because he was wearing this tree bark. And so they all came out, and they all paid respect to him, and they worshipped him, and they treated him very, very respectfully. And when Bahya noticed what was going on and why they were treating him so respectfully, he actually pretended to be an ascetic, and he took on that role. Instead of telling them that he was a shipwrecked merchant that needed help, he just pretended to be this renunciant. And so for many, many years, he lived in that area, many decades actually, he lived in that area wearing tree bark, and after a while, not actually pretending to be a renunciate anymore, but actually being an ascetic and doing various ascetic practices. So that's how Bahya actually transformed from a householder into a wandering ascetic, basically by accident. be worshipped by the people. And this is the point where our sutta picks up today, with Bahya living in that place and enjoying his time there with the people there. And today we are reading the sutta from the Udana 1.10, the Bahya Sutta. I have put a link in the live chat, so you can follow along if you like. Today we are reading from Bhante Sudaso's translation, which is a little bit unusual. Usually we read either Bhikkhu Bodhi's or Bhante Sujato's. The reason why we are reading Bhante Sudaso's is that Bhikkhu Bodhi's is not on Sutta Central, and Bhante Sujato's, actually Bhikkhu Bodhi hasn't made a translation of this sutta, and Bhante Sujato's is on Sutta Central, but there's a mistake there. There's a sentence missing in one of the crucial parts of the sutta where the main teaching of the Buddha is, and it hasn't been fixed yet. So I think it's best not to use that translation. I did contact Bhante Sujato a week ago, but it seems that he's busy and he hasn't looked into it yet. So for that reason, I think it's best that we use Bhante Sudaso's translation today. So the link is there in the live chat, and if you want, you can read along. So the story picks up at this point where Bahya is an ascetic and living there with the people in that village, or close to that village. And the sutta begins. Thus have I heard, on one occasion the Blessed One was living at Savatthi at Jeta's Grove in Anathapindika's park. On this occasion, Bahya Daurachirya, or Bahya of the bark cloth, was living at Supadaka on the shore of the ocean. He was honored, respected, revered, worshipped, and esteemed, and he received robes, alms food, dwellings, medicines, and medical supplies. Then, when Bahya was alone in retreat, this thought arose in his mind. There are beings in this world who are arahants, or are on the way to becoming arahants. I am one of them. So here we see that this introduction to the sutta ties in very nicely with the commentarial story. So usually we have to be a little bit careful with commentarial stories. Sometimes they contradict the suttas in some ways, but here it seems that it ties in very nicely. Bahya Daurachirya is living close to the shore of the ocean because, as the commentary says, he was shipwrecked and he was treated very, very well by the people. They respected him very much and they supported him with the 4 requisites. And because Bahya had received all this worship for so long, many decades here at this point, he actually started to believe that he was treated that well and that he was worshipped so much because he was an arahant. So he gave rise to a lot of pride and a lot of delusion in his mind. And at this point, he receives some help from a former friend, and the sutta continues. A deva who used to be one of Bahya's relatives knew what Bahya was thinking, and out of compassion and well-wishing for Bahya, he approached Bahya and said to him, Bahya, you are certainly not an arahant, and you are not on the way to becoming an arahant. You aren't even doing the practices by means of which you could be an arahant or be on the way to becoming an arahant. So here a deva appears again, and again the commentary says this is the same deva that has appeared in our series several times already. This is the Anagami friend, the bhikkhu who became an Anagami in Kassapa Buddha's time, one of their group of 7. And when the new Buddha arose, Gautama Buddha, he was looking out for his 5 friends who hadn't made any attainments, and he was trying to guide them towards the Buddha. And this deva we've already seen was guiding Sabya towards the Buddha, and he also guided Kumara Kassapa in the sutta that we read last time. And now he's also helping Bahya Daurachirya come in contact with the Dhamma, to meet the Buddha, and to enable him to actually make progress on the path. So this deva comes and now sort of tries to shake Bahya's delusion and tell him that he's not an arahant, and he doesn't even know how to become an arahant. He doesn't even know the practices that he would need to do in order to become an arahant. And then Bahya obviously is quite alarmed, and he asks, then who in this world of devas is currently an arahant or on the way to becoming an arahant? And the deva says, Bahya, in the northern country, there is a city named Savatthi. That is where the Blessed One lives now, the arahant, the fully awakened one. Bahya, that Blessed One is an arahant and teaches the way to become an arahant. So here we see Bahya's reaction. He doesn't become angry and doesn't ignore the deva and clings onto his own delusion, but he actually takes the deva seriously and is quite alarmed, and actually does have a spiritual interest and does want to become an arahant truly, and is now asking for guidance how to become an arahant, and the deva guides him towards the Buddha and tells him where he should go in order to find the Buddha. So Bahya isn't just delusional and doesn't just want to have the worship of those people. He actually still has all these wholesome seeds from the past. And when he hears that there is a path to arahantship, he's actually quite motivated to do what is necessary to meet that teacher. And then motivated by that deva, Bahya left Supadaka. On his way to Savatthi, he only stayed one night in each place he passed through. So that means he was really, really, really motivated to find the Buddha as soon as possible, and he didn't even rest on the way. Every place he only stayed one night. There wasn't any time for recuperation or for rest. So he didn't stay 2 nights in one place in order to rest, but he really wandered each and every single day in order to meet the Buddha as soon as possible. And when he arrived, he went to Jeta's grove and entered Anathapindika's park. On this occasion, several monks were doing walking meditation in the open air. Bahya approached those monks and said to them, Bhantes, where does the Blessed One currently live? The Arahant, the fully awakened one. We wish to see the Blessed One, the Arahant, the fully awakened one. And they tell him, Bahya, he has entered the residential area for alms. So the Buddha has gone into Savatthi and he is on alms round. And then Bahya went through Jeta's grove, leaving it behind and entering Savatthi. There he saw the Blessed One going for alms in Savatthi, inspiring, inspirational, his appearance peaceful, his mind peaceful, with the utmost self-mastery and tranquility, trained, restrained, self-controlled, and majestic. Having seen the Blessed One, he approached him and lowered himself to the ground with his head at the Blessed One's feet, saying, Teach me the Dhamma Bhante, Blessed One, teach me the Dhamma Sublime One, for the sake of my long-term benefit and happiness. When this was said, the Blessed One said to Bahya, This is not the time, Bahya. I have entered a residential area for alms. So that the Buddha is on alms round, and he does not wait in Jeta's grove for his return. He goes into Savatthi straight away in order to meet the Buddha as soon as possible, and he does meet the Buddha, and he is very, very inspired. And he kneels down on the ground and he bows to the Buddha, and he requests a teaching straight away. But the Buddha tells him, well, this is obviously not a good time. He's on alms round, so this is not a suitable setting for a Dhamma teaching. So usually when we teach Dhamma, the teacher would be sitting down. Everybody should be sitting down. They should be in a comfortable place. It should be a fairly quiet place so that you're not distracted, so you have full attention to the Dhamma talk. So doing that while standing in the middle of a city where it's busy, where it's loud, where lots of people walk by, and there are so many distractions, is really not a suitable way of teaching Dhamma. For that reason, the Buddha declared, and obviously he doesn't refuse to teach Bahya altogether, but he just doesn't want to teach him while on alms round. He would actually be quite happy to teach him later. But Bahya does not give up at this point, and he persists, and he continues and says, Bhante, it is hard to know how long the Blessed One's life will last, or how long my life will last. Teach me the Dhamma, Bhante, Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, Sublime One, for the sake of my long-term benefit and happiness. A second time, the Blessed One said to Bahya, This is not the time, Bahya. I have entered a residential area for alms. A third time, Bahya said to the Blessed One, Bhante, it is hard to know how long the Blessed One's life will last, or how long my life will last. Teach me the Dhamma, Bhante, Blessed One. Teach me the Dhamma, Sublime One, for the sake of my long-term benefit and happiness. So Bahya doesn't give up, and he persists, and he requests a Dhamma talk again and again, because he thinks he's unable to wait, because if he waits until later, then it's not sure that the Blessed One will actually survive, that the Buddha will actually live on for another few hours. I mean, he could die at any time, or Bahya himself can die at any time. So now that he has the opportunity, he's not going to let it go. And we see here there are some seeds from a past life that seem to have come up in Bahya, or some reflections that he thought about, like death contemplations, which he probably would have done under Kassapa Buddha, or maybe he even did as a non-Buddhist ascetic, where we reflect on the impermanence of life, and and he seems to have very deeply understood that nothing can be taken for granted, and that death can happen at any moment. So he doesn't give up and keeps on requesting for the Dhamma talk. And according to the commentary, at this point, Bahya was also quite advanced in age already, and that's maybe another reason why death was kind of at the forefront of his mind also, because he could clearly see that he wouldn't, that his life was coming to an end. So Bahya keeps on requesting a Dhamma talk again and again. And I think this situation is very similar. It really strongly reminds us, and probably reminds also many of you in the audience, of the situation between Sariputta, how Sariputta encountered the Dhamma when Sariputta met Assaji, the monk Assaji, who was one of the first 5 monks who were converted by the Buddha, who became Buddhist bhikkhus, who formed the earliest Sangha, and who became the first 5 arahants in the world. One of them was the monk Assaji. And one day when Assaji was on alms round, just like the Buddha is on alms round here, Sariputta encountered him, and he was also very inspired by the way Assaji was moving through town, being very peaceful and being very inspirational and very mindful and self-controlled. And then Sariputta also approaches Assaji and asks for a teaching. And the same kind of thing happens, and eventually Assaji gives him a very short stanza, very, very brief Dhamma teaching, and Sariputta is, with that short teaching, able to make the breakthrough and become a stream enterer. And then he goes to Moggallana, repeats the stanza there. Moggallana also becomes a stream enterer, and they, together with 250 monks, join the Buddha and the Buddhist Sangha. So here Bahya and the Buddha seem to have a very, very similar encounter to the other chief disciples, Sariputta and Assaji. And exactly as in the other encounter here, also the Buddha finally relents and gives in to Bahya's request, and also teaches him with a few short stanzas. So the Dhamma teaching that Bahya gets is actually also very, very brief. And now the Buddha finally relents, and he says, therefore, Bahya, this is how you are to train yourself. In the scene, there will be just the scene. In the herd, there will be just the herd. In the sensed, there will be just the sensed. in the cognized, there will be just the cognized. This bahya is how you're to train yourself. So this is the first stanza. There are 2 more. And in the first stanza, the Buddha now gives bahya a path of practice, how he needs to practice in order to become an arahant. And as we know, bahya had a very, very strong practice from a past life. Therefore, the Buddha here gives him a very, very high-level teaching about non-self. And he's teaching it in relation to the 6 sense spaces. So the 6 sense spaces here, the seen, just the seen. Obviously, this refers to the eye. The heard, just the heard. That refers to the ear sense, and then the sensed, just the sensed. That refers to the sense of smell, the sense of taste, and the sense of touches, so bodily touches. So that's a catch-all category for those 3 senses that appears in several suttas, not only just here. And then the cognized, just the cognized, that's of course a reference to the mind sense, the internal sense, so that captures our internal experience, our emotions, our thoughts, our views, our defilements, our habit patterns, all these kind of things that happen internally, while the other 5 senses obviously happen, obviously cover what happens in the outside world, what our outside senses come in contact with. So in whatever way we make experiences, whether from the outside world or internally, we need to understand that these are just experiences. This is just objects, external objects or internal objects come in touch with our senses, and that's all there is. There's only so much. What we usually do is we superimpose a self there, or an I there, or some kind of personal experience there, when actually this is an entirely impersonal process, and the self is what our delusion creates on top of that. And says here, no, it should just be what we see, just the scene, what we hear, just the heard, and not the superimposition of a self or an I that truly doesn't exist. So this is a very high-level teaching about non-self or impersonality. And the Buddha can give bahya this high-level teaching because bahya has done so many practices under Kassapa Buddha already that bahya is able to understand what the Buddha is talking about here with only this short statement. And then the Buddha continues. Bahya, when it is like this for you, in the seen, there's just the seen. In the heard, there's just the heard. In the sensed, there's just the sensed. In the cognized, there's just the cognized. Then, bahya, there will be no you in terms of this. When there's no you in terms of this, then there is no you there. When there's no you there, there's no you here or beyond or in between. Just this is the end of suffering. So the Buddha here teaches the entire path to Nibbana, to bahya, starting from a very high point already. And he says, if bahya actually trains in that way that he just outlined, so in the seen, just seeing just the seen, or in the heard, just the heard, in the sense, just the sense, in the cognized, just the cognized, then the delusion of a self will be gone. There will be no you in terms of this. So we will not superimpose a notion of a self on any of our experiences, whether they are external, from the external senses or from the internal mind sense. Whatever experience we have, there will be no more superimposition of a self. When we stop doing that, then obviously we don't perceive of any self anymore. We clearly understand non-self. And when we clearly understand non-self, that is the last fetter that we need to break in order to attain arahantship. So the conceit I am, this is one of the last fetters before arahantship. And the Buddha says, yeah, when we don't conceive of this self anymore, then there is no more self here or there. And he says there's no more here. Here refers to this life that we are living at present, beyond refers to a next life, because obviously there won't be a next life anymore. Or in between means in the transition period from one life to the next. And the Buddha says, just this is the end of suffering. So this is how we come to the end of the Buddhist path, how we overcome dukkha, suffering, and how someone can attain nibbana. So we can see this entire teaching here is about really understanding how to practice and how to make the breakthrough to arahantship by understanding non-self. And the Buddha here gives Bahya this whole path to nibbana. And as I mentioned, Bahya, because of his strong practice in a past life, is able to make use of this teaching. And then the sutta continues. Then while the Blessed One was teaching this brief Dhamma teaching to Bahya, Bahya's mind was liberated from the corruptions by means of non-attachment. So Bahya is able to deeply understand, even though this is at the middle of the town, it's very busy, it's noisy, it's not a good place for a Dhamma teaching. And the Buddha was actually quite reluctant to teaching. Still, Bahya is able to make use of this really, really brief and really, really brief teaching. And he becomes an arahant right then, right there. And because Bahya attains so quickly with such a small teaching, Bahya actually became the monk who was foremost in swiftness of insight. Because he attained so quickly. On the nun's side, there's also a nun who has this same foremost position. The nun who is foremost in swiftness of insight is Kundalakesa, and she also has this story. She also encountered the Buddha on a path somewhere, and the Buddha gave her a very brief teaching, and she also attained the path right then, right there. So that's how Bahya and Bada Kundalakesa, in a very similar way, gained this foremost position for having such strong wisdom that they can attain so quickly. And then after the Blessed One had instructed Bahya with this brief instruction, he left. And not long after the Blessed One left, a young cow encountered Bahya and killed him. So Bahya was right. His life didn't last much longer. He could not have waited. If he had waited for a later time to get a Dhamma teaching, he would not have made it. He would have died as Putujana, as an ordinary person without any attainments, instead of passing away as an arahant. So he was right not to let the Buddha go and to insist on getting the teaching. Because he was killed by that cow. And of course, that reminds us of the story with Pukusati that we read a few weeks ago, where Pukusati also was killed by a cow just before he was able to join the Buddhist Sangha. He was looking for a robe and a bowl in order to be able to join the Sangha and become a monk. And he was also killed by a cow just like Bahya. And so we noticed that both Bahya and Pukusati never actually became Buddhist monks. They had very high attainments on the Buddhist path. One was an anagami, one was an arahant, but none of them actually managed to become a monk because they were killed by a cow beforehand. And the commentary says that this is the same cow that killed both of them, and there are more stories of a cow killing bhikkhus in other suttas. So apparently this wasn't an uncommon experience back then, that people were killed by cows. I don't know if cows were particularly vicious then, or what happened there, but apparently cows were known to trample people to death back then on a somewhat regular basis. So this is not an uncommon thing in the suttas. And as I mentioned, the commentary says that this was the same cow. But I think that's a little bit unlikely because Pukusati Sutta takes place in Rajagaha and Bahya Sutta takes place in Savatthi. So those are hundreds of kilometers away from each other, those cities. So I think it's unlikely that the same cow walked for like such a long distance. And I think it's probably a different cow who killed those two bhikkhus. But I think what is interesting is that when we look at the life stories of those 5 monks, is that there are so many parallels. So it seems that the strong practice they did together under Kassapa Buddha kind of set their lives on very similar paths, and they made very similar experiences in their last life. Not only the cow killing 2 of them before they were able to become arahants, but also how that Deva looked after them so well, and many other parallels, like how 2 of the monks, Dabbamalaputta and Kumara Kassapa, became monks at the age of 7, or how many of them actually were already born into an ascetic movement, like Sabya, who was born into a renunciate movement because his mother already was a renunciant, and also Kumara Kassapa was born into the Sangha because his mother was a bhikkhuni. So the seeds to, or the drive towards monastic life was very strong in them already. And we just see that many of their life stories have a lot of parallels with each other, and I think that's because they were so close in a past life that they seem to have been on very similar trajectories in their last life. Yeah, and then after Bahya has died, the sutta continues. Then after the Blessed One had gone for alms in Savatthi, had eaten his meal, and was returning from alms round, accompanied by several monks. When he left the city, he saw that Bahya had died. When he saw this, he said to the monks, "Monks, take Bahya's corpse, put it on a pallet, take it out and burn it, then build a monument." So a monument here, this is a translation for a stupa. "Monks, one of your fellow spiritual practitioners has died." "Yes, Bhante," those monks replied to the Blessed One. They took Bahya's corpse, put it on a pallet, took it out, burned it, and built a monument. Then they approached the Blessed One, paid respects to him, and sat to one side. When they were seated to one side, they said to the Blessed One, "Bhante, Bahya's corpse has been burned, and your monument has been built. What is his destination? What is his next life?" "Monks, Bahya was wise. He practiced Dhamma in accordance with Dhamma. He did not concern me on account of the Dhamma. Monks, Bahya has attained final Nibbana." So here we have the Buddha, and he asked the monks to cremate Bahya's body and to build a stupa for him. And of course, this is quite unusual for someone who is not a Buddhist monk. Usually we only build stupas for arahants, for highly attained monastics, monks or nuns. Gender doesn't matter here. And this shows again that the Buddha accepts Bahya as a Buddhist monk, even though Bahya never took formal ordination, never had the opportunity to take formal ordination because he died before he was able to. And the Buddha clearly states that he accepts Bahya as a member of the Sangha because he calls him a fellow spiritual practitioner. In other translations, this is called a companion in the holy life. I think this is the expression that Bhikkhu Bodhi uses. The Pali word is sabrahmachari. So this clearly refers to someone who is a member of the Buddhist Sangha. And it shows that the Buddha accepts Bahya because he's an arahant, because he was already a renunciant before, very similar to how he treated Pukusati when he called Pukusati bhikkhu all the time, even though Pukusati also didn't have formal bhikkhu ordination. And it shows that for the Buddha, the practice was more important than going through that ceremony. So the practice and the attainments that they had was more important than the formal ordination procedure. And of course, the Buddha at the end also confirms that Bahya was an arahant. And then the sutta ends with a beautiful little poem or gatha or stanza from the Buddha. And the Buddha says, "But then the Blessed One, having understood this matter, made this proclamation at that time. Where water, earth, fire, and wind have no hold, where stars do not shine and the sun has no radiance, where the moon does not glow and darkness cannot be found. When one personally knows this, a sage, a holy person of true wisdom, then from form, formlessness, pleasure, and pain, they are freed." So here the Buddha gives a description, some kind of description of Nibbana, or it's not actually a description of Nibbana, but it's a description of what Nibbana is not. So Nibbana is not a place anywhere in the world as we know it. It's not in our material world. It's not a plane of rebirth in a heaven realm or a lower realm. It's just it cannot be measured in our ordinary experience with the material elements that we know here described as water, earth, fire, and wind. It's not somewhere in outer space. It's not somewhere up in the heavens. But also where the contrast or the dichotomies between two extremes, such as here the light of the sun and the darkness. This also doesn't make sense. So it doesn't, when we say the sun or the stars do not shine, it doesn't mean that it's dark there. So it's just that these kinds of dichotomies don't have any meaning when we talk about Nibbana, because they all refer to the world as we know it, to the samsaric world. So when somebody has truly understood this, as the Buddha says here, then they are freed from pleasure and pain. So especially from pain, they're freed from dukkha, they're freed from rebirth. And they're freed from rebirth because the Buddha says here, from form and formlessness, they are freed. So these refer to different ways of rebirth, either in form realms or formless realms. So we're just entirely freed from anything in the samsaric world, any kind of description that we could give, because all kinds of description we could give all refer to the samsaric world, and nothing of this applies, obviously, to Nibbana. So with this very beautiful, inspiring stanza, the Buddha ends this sutta. And at this point, I am also going to end our sutta discussion for today. If you have any questions or comments, you can type them in the live chat, and I will see if I can answer them. So Gita says, it's a very long journey, almost from one end of India to the other, west to east coast, especially by foot. Yes, it's a very long journey. And as the story says, he didn't rest on the way. He kept on walking every single day because he was really, really determined to find the Buddha. And I think one of the reasons is that he had such strong seeds from the past life, and he was already of advanced age. So he really felt that he didn't have time to lose. And so he was willing to make the trip anyway, even though it was really difficult to make. And I think if we understand how valuable the Dhamma is, then we would be prepared, be prepared to take on a lot of hardships in order to come in contact with the Dhamma. And I think Bahya kind of deeply understood how valuable it would be, and so he was ready to make those sacrifices to encounter the Buddha. And Pial and Indira ask, is the noting technique of meditation I hear, used by some, I believe in Burma, originates from the Bahya Sutta, for example, from statement, when you see, you only see, when you hear, you only see, etc. Yes, people sometimes cite the Bahya Sutta for the noting technique. But I think it's not just the Bahya Sutta. I think people also base that on other suttas, any kind of teaching about the 4 elements. Sometimes they also base it on the Satipatthana Sutta, where we should see things with clear insight. So I think the noting technique can be quite useful, especially for people who are Vipassana types. That can be somewhat useful to make insights. Obviously, the Bahya Sutta wasn't given for beginners. So trying to base one's practice exclusively on the Bahya Sutta, if you're not at that level yet, I think is a little bit short-sighted and is probably not enough. So for beginners, it's much better to get a better overview of the different suttas that are out there, suttas that have more like broader teachings, that have different approaches to meditation, that teach about different things also, because the Bahya Sutta only teaches about non-self. So there isn't much teaching about other Dhamma categories. There's not much teaching about even the other 2 of the 3 characteristics, anicca and dukkha. And for beginners, it's much, or for people who are not at the level of just being on the brink of arahantship yet, it's much better to have a broader approach to the practice. It's better to practice a complete 8-fold path, and maybe also experiment with different meditation techniques. For example, if you just do the noting technique that you mentioned here, your practice will be a little bit lopsided probably. It would be better if you could also complement that with practices like metta, and maybe some other techniques from time to time, because the Bahya Sutta was really given to an arahant, and most people are not on that level yet. And Sud has a question which is in 2 parts, and they ask, how can one reconcile loving kindness with equanimity? Since if you consider what is seen is just seen, what is known is just known, it feels like you are letting go, but then in loving kindness, you are holding on to emotion. So in loving kindness, if you're doing it properly, you're not holding on to emotion. In loving kindness, if you do it properly, then you're not holding on, you're letting go. And what you should feel in loving kindness is your heart really opening up and becoming boundless, and actually letting go of everything that is in there. Obviously, that takes a lot of practice in order to be able to do loving kindness that is, as the sutta says, immeasurable, boundless, and so on. So, but if you do it properly, if you actually do Brahma Vihara practice properly, then there is no holding on. So loving kindness should be an emotion that naturally comes if you let go of everything. Then you just have a feeling of goodwill towards all beings. So if you hold on and then there's still clinging there, then you're not doing loving kindness practice properly yet to the full extent as it should be practiced. So that can be a beginning stage, but it's not the end result of loving kindness practice. If you're holding on, then your metta is very limited to people that you like, maybe, or that people you're practicing towards, or maybe if you're practicing loving kindness towards yourself, then you're clinging to yourself. But if it feels like you're holding on, then your heart hasn't properly opened yet, and it's not properly boundless yet. So that's just a preliminary stage of metta, not the final stage yet. And then Jones says Majjhima Nikaya 1 is interesting accompaniment to this sutta. And so Majjhima Nikaya 1 obviously is the it's called, I think, the root of all things, is the translation of that title. And it goes through a long list of things that you should not cling to, that an ordinary being clings to, and then a trainee on the path tries to let go, and an arahant and a Buddha have fully let go. So yeah, Majjhima Nikaya 1 is a lot more detailed, obviously, than the Bahya Sutta, which only has a few short stanzas. The thing with the Majjhima Nikaya 1 is that many people find it somewhat hard to understand, hard to practice. And this is the only sutta in the entire canon where the monks in the end did not delight in the sutta. So apparently it was also too difficult for the monks back then to understand. So Majjhima Nikaya 1 is good for people who can relate to that sutta, but for some people, they feel like they cannot relate to the sutta. But if people enjoy Majjhima Nikaya 1, definitely it's a very, very good sutta to go along with Bahya. I think you're right there. And then Claudia says, hello, Claudia, nice to see you. I'm glad you were able to join today. Often the Buddha can see the future of people he is meeting. Why did he refuse to teach him 2 times? If he might have known that Bahya has to die very soon. So, well, I'm not sure if the Buddha was able to know that in this point. The sutta doesn't mention that he checks whether or not Bahya was like how long Bahya's life was going to continue. In any case, sometimes the Buddha just refuses in order to make the other person really focus and become clear of what they want. And if they just randomly request something and the Buddha just gives it to them, they wouldn't pay proper attention. But if they really have to insist that they want to get the teaching, then they would properly pay attention when the Buddha is actually teaching. And obviously in the situation that they were in, it was really important for Bahya to pay proper attention because it was a busy town. There was lots of things going on around them. Bahya had just come from travel. He was probably quite exhausted. His mind might not have been very clear in the beginning. So by the Buddha kind of forcing him to request 3 times also was kind of a skillful means maybe to make Bahya really focus on the teaching that he was getting and really valuing the teaching because it was somewhat hard to gain. Maybe I think the most likely explanation is that it was a skillful means in order to make Bahya properly establish mindfulness and value the teaching that he was getting. And then there is one last question in the live chat so far, and this one is by Pia and Indira again. And they quote the sutta and they say, there's no you in connection with that. When there's no you in connection with that, there is no you there. When there's no you there, you're neither here nor yonder nor between the two. This is the end of stress. Does the above passage point to emptiness or planes of rebirth you mentioned? So you're quoting not from Bhattacharya's translation, but I think this is Ajahn Thanissaro's translation. So what I mentioned as planes of rebirth is the passage where it says you're neither here nor yonder nor between the two, or as Bhattacharya translates, you're neither here nor or beyond or in between. So that passage clearly refers to our life now. That's being here. Beyond is the next life, or in between is the transition period in between lives. I think that's quite clear. the part above that, with there being no you in connection with that, and there, no you being there, that refers to non-self. And non-self is basically another expression of emptiness. So you can't really differentiate between the two. When you talk about non-self, it also means that things are empty. Empty of an inherent existence, just existing as a process based on conditions. And when the condition cease, then the result also will fall apart. So you can't really differentiate between the teaching of non-self and the teaching of emptiness. These are basically the same, two sides of the same coin, the same thing. So the one passage refers to rebirth, and the other thing refers, as you say, to emptiness or to non-self, which are basically the same thing. So I see no further questions so far. The Bhaya Sutta obviously is a very profound sutta, teaching about emptiness, which I think is very beautiful, very inspirational. And if there are no further questions, then we can end for today, and we can end our mini-series about the monks from Kassapa Buddha's time. I hope you enjoyed all their beautiful and unusual suttas and all their beautiful and inspiring life stories. And I think it's also very beautiful to see how, if you have a strong practice in one life, that can carry over many lifetimes, and that can enable you to come in contact with the Buddha again when the opportunity arises in the future. Even if in the life now, you don't have any attainments, just like the 5 monks didn't even gain stream entry, but still the seeds that they planted were so strong that they came in contact with the Dhamma again when the opportunity arose. So for that reason also, I think these stories and these suttas are very, very beautiful. And so I hope that you enjoyed this mini-series. We will end for today with 3 sadhus. Feel free to join in if you like. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. And I will see you all next Tuesday when we start a new series. And I will still have to think of a topic. I think probably the topic will be conflict resolution or conflict management and the Buddha's strategies of how to deal with conflict. But we'll just have to see what happens next week. And I wish you all a good week and a good rest of the day. Bye-bye.